All right, so you need 75% of the Baseball Writers Association of America votes to get in. David Ortiz got 77.9%. He's the lone inductee this year, 0 last year. Again, one of 4 players with 500 home runs and 3 World Series titles. Has the most postseason go-ahead hits in history. I believe it's 17, if memory serves. But he was mentioned in the Mitchell Report, and he is connected to the steroid era. Which leads us to, once again, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, along with Curt Schilling and Sammy Sosa, in their 10th time on the ballot, are now off the baseball writers' ballot. Their fate rests with the Veterans Committee, the Today's Game era committee. They can get 12 out of 16, 75% of that committee's votes. And they can still get in the Hall of Fame. They can still get into Cooperstown. You know, Michael, it's funny. I haven't had this conversation in a long time. Once upon a time, this was like an everyday conversation in sports talk, especially at the height of the steroids era and the fallout from the steroids era. And I feel like I evolved because, you know, I like to be consistent, but not stubbornly consistent. I think I evolved. I think early on, I may have been part of the outrage mob. I may have been part of the cheated the game chorus. I feel like I was at one point, but like many people, my attitude has softened and evolved about this. I was always conflicted. I at least know that. At the minimum, I was conflicted. It wasn't just, nope, you did PEDs, you're out. Because I always recognized that there were plenty of cheaters in Cooperstown, plenty of people who performed in a segregated game in Cooperstown, whose careers deserve asterisks, who are in Cooperstown. There are no perfect people in Cooperstown despite this morality or character clause, which is the problem with this process, because you have flawed human beings judging other flawed human beings. And I'll ask you the question this way, Michael. I'll ask you the question this way. What does a greater disservice, or what discredits the Hall of Fame more? Letting people like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Curt Schilling, Sammy Sosa, Alex Rodriguez, hell, Pete Rose, as far as I'm concerned, let him in too. What's worse, letting them in or keeping them out? Because for me, a museum is about telling a story. History.
Telling a story.
It's about telling a story. Yes. The story of baseball is incomplete, and we don't need it sanitized. We don't need it edited. Just tell the truth. It's not hard.
Tell a story.
But if you're going to keep the greatest baseball player that most of us have ever seen, who was already a Hall of Famer before he ever thought about taking performance-enhancing drugs, if you're going to keep the most dominant pitcher out that many of us have ever seen, with all due respect to some others who are in the conversation, then, let's just clean up the whole thing. You want to clean up the game? Let's clean up the game. Let's vacate their records. Let's vacate their awards. Let's vacate all the team accomplishments that their teams and teammates achieved, thanks in no small part to their contributions. Let's refund all the money that baseball and baseball owners made off of Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds. Let's take Bud Selig out of the Hall of Fame as he oversaw the steroid era. Let's take off some wins from some of these managers, like a Tony La Russa. If you want to go there, let's go there.
Who's in the Hall of Fame?
But to keep these people all out of the Hall of Fame, it doesn't hurt them, because we all know that they're Hall of Famers. We all know what they did. We saw it with our own eyes. It hurts the credibility of the baseball, right? It hurts. Okay, it hurts both. It more so. Well, no, I'm not talking about how they feel about it. I'm not talking about how they feel about it. I'm saying it doesn't hurt their reputations, because we know what they did. Their numbers and accomplishments and ability speaks for themselves. They may be disappointed, even though they won't necessarily admit it. What I'm saying is, it does more damage to the credibility of the Hall and the baseball writers, who after 10 years cannot see fit to get off their high horse, get off their soapbox, and take off the white wig and understand that these people are integral to the history of baseball and belong in the Hall of Fame, full stop.
What was the, I'll get there, because you just said a lot of beautiful things right there. Really did. But you need to remind me, because you're better at the recall on this than I am. what was the Chris Rock joke? When he was like, who's more racist than old black people?
Oh, yeah, that was it.
That was
Yeah. Old black men.
He said,
if the revolution ever come, I'll kill her first.
That's right. I love Susie.
Just to show them I mean business.
Yeah. None of this couldn't get a cab stuff. They were the cab.
Right.
You know what I
they
mean?
were the cab. Left.
Right. So,
Right, yeah.
The reason I bring that up is because we keep talking about the baseball writers. Mm-hmm. But some of these Hall of
players
Famers,
too. Oh, hi, Joe Morgan.
Some of these Hall of Famers,
no, it's the players too.
I mean, they are more
too.
militant. They are more get off my lawn. The fortress is real with them.
Yeah.
They ain't trying to see these guys get in. And so when I look at taking it from the writers, and you mentioned the Today's committee, the Today committee is going to meet this year in the Baseball Hall of Fame to see if Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa have a more embraceable audience, a more forgiving audience. No, they don't. Not there.
Not with them.
So a lot of these.
Yeah.
So
right.
the problem is deep. The problem is there are a lot of pockets that are just not having it, or they just don't want to hear it. You can make these reasonable arguments about a museum or anything like that, but once they get into the club, then it's more exclusive. I'm in now. So I ain't trying to have this guy in, or I'm not trying to have him in. And all the things you say are absolutely true. I mean, it's hard to look at some of the inconsistencies in baseball and then take the whole operation seriously. All right, so really, there are guys in the Hall of Fame who never played against black players.
Yeah.
But black players were alive.
And who were a part of shutting out black players. There are
y'all don't have a problem
in the
with
Hall
that?
of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, y'all don't have a problem with that?
There are cheaters in the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
There are people connected to PEDs. David Ortiz even. I mean, it's like David Ortiz belongs in the Hall of Fame. His connection to PEDs, while it may not be the same set of circumstances as somebody else, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He even said, "How am I in and they're not?"
Yeah, and so really, okay, let's just talk about this. Your point of the steroid era. We call it the steroid era, capital S, capital E. It was a real thing. It wasn't 5 years, wasn't 10 years. Way back in 1988, Thomas Boswell of the Washington Post wrote a column about Jose Canseco, and this was at Fenway Park. Fenway Park, Oakland A's, Boston Red Sox. They're chanting steroids at Fenway.
Yeah.
That's that's 34 years ago. They're chanting steroids. So I would say the era unofficially started then because Canseco was one of the few doing it in 88. By 90, 91, 92, especially 93,
everybody was doing it.
It started to turn. So let's say that era unofficially 1988 to the first year of testing 2004. That's a grip. That's a real era. And so I think if you're going to shut those guys out, you're making a mistake. Just call it the steroid era. Have a whole wing in the Hall of Fame. Steroid era, tell the story.
I don't even need to go that far. Because again, then let's start categorizing like we just talked about. All the people who, look a little funnier in the light as time goes on. Do we need to say, okay, if pre-integration, y'all over in this corner? Like, I don't think you need an asterisk.
Tell that story too.
Okay, that's my okay, but I don't think you need to necessarily separate the players.
I'm not saying put a scarlet letter on them. I'm not saying that. What I'm just saying is, as we go through, like you've been to the African American Museum, and every stage, every floor, every exhibit, it represents a piece of history. And so you're telling that story. Okay, here he is. This is where we were with busing, and here this is where we were with Plessy versus Ferguson and what that meant in the late 1800s. And you're telling the story of history, and you're telling the story of baseball. And I just think it's interesting that Bud Selig, who presided over this era, is in. How do you say that this era was so terrible and its stars need to be shunned when the commissioner of baseball, the only commissioner, by the way, in my lifetime, who canceled the World Series, he's in the Hall of Fame, but the stars of that era are not. You can't do that. It doesn't work.
I don't care what they put in their bodies. The amount of money they put in owners' pockets, in networks' pockets, is immeasurable.
Yep.
Everybody enjoyed the show. Everybody enjoyed the show until we decided to grow conscious about it. And this is the thing that baffles me. Like, I'm gonna use some numbers that's gonna make it silly for you. And not their statistics. Everybody knows the statistics, okay? Barry Bonds, they got the highest percentage of votes in 10 years. Barry Bonds got 260 votes. Roger Clemens got 257 votes. Okay? They each needed 296. So that means because 40 people versus 260 people, but 40 people were like, I'm not comfortable with the fact that they're not in Cooperstown? 40 people.
Right.
40 people. Like, come on. Like, it's just that this system is absolutely silly, and we're all adults. Put them in Cooperstown. It's easy to explain that their legacies are complicated, but they are conspicuous by their absence from a place that is there to tell the history of baseball.
Michael Smith. Alex Rodriguez was a Hall of Fame shortstop. Wait a minute, no. He was a Hall of Fame shortstop and a Hall of Fame third baseman. Because when he went to New York and played third base, sorry, Derek, it was your team. You're the captain. He had to step aside. But if you really want to be honest about it, Alex Rodriguez was your best shortstop who was playing third base.
Yes.
So he's a third baseman. And now he starts his career as a Hall of Fame third baseman, ending it only because he got traded to New York. He ends it as a shortstop, but he was still going. And I know you want to talk about complicated. His complications are way up there, but that's not really what I want to say.
Yeah.
When you talk about an era, we always look at the top of it. We always look at the top. So I already mentioned the top man in charge, Bud Selig. I talked about the top players of the steroid era, whether it's Roger Clemens or Barry Bonds. But how about this? When the top of the culture, when the top of the era is happening up there, that means there's a trickle-down effect. In other words, there were good players who became all-stars in the steroid era that we didn't pay attention to. There
People who shouldn't have been in the majors.
There were AAA guys who were the 24th and 25th guy because of the steroid era. It affected the entire thing.
Outcome
so you can't say,
I
don't know about you.
You can't measure it.
You're clean. You're clean.
Real quick
so
before we go to break.
You don't know that.
I'm glad you mentioned Alex Rodriguez. It may be as simple. This might not be a blanket statement. Maybe they just don't like Barry Bonds for a variety of reasons, which are well documented. Maybe they just don't like Roger Clemens. There's plenty of reasons not to like Kurt Schilling. I can't argue with that one as much. But Ortiz, very likable. Very likable.
Yeah.
So it's it's not right. It's not right. It's because it's incomplete. And I don't want an incomplete story. I want the most comprehensive, unedited, unabridged story possible when I look at baseball.
I think it's going to happen. I think it will happen. It didn't happen yesterday, but I think we'll get there.
Even with that unforgiving audience of players and umpires and general managers you talked about, or whoever makes up this committee?
Get there. They'll come around. Hey, thanks for watching Brother from Another on YouTube. Make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, and be sure to watch us 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Appreciate you.